Is the us in AUKUS in doubt? When asked by a reporter, President Trump didn't recognize the Australia-UK-US acronym, and now the nominated Undersecretary of Defense is questioning whether it's in U.S. interest to supply Australia with nuclear attack submarines. And while China conducts its own naval exercises in the Tasman Sea, can AUKUS become the defense bloc it was meant to be? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is AUKUS. Well, many would say the new U.S. administration is unpredictable, and whatever agreements were signed before its tenure may not hold up under President Trump. So where could that leave the 2021 Australia, United Kingdom, United States alliance? Well, Trump's nominee for Undersecretary of Defense has said he's skeptical about AUKUS, especially if it means selling submarines to Australia when they should be stationed closer to Taiwan and Japan to protect against China. Of course, the U.S. is happy to sell technology to any of its allies, but they can only build about 1.2 submarines a year. So Australia's purchase under AUKUS might not be a priority. Here's a look.
Discussing AUKUS with the Prime Minister, sir.
What does that mean?
AUKUS, the Australian...
What appeared to be a brief slip of the tongue from the US President during the British Prime Minister's recent White House visit has nonetheless caused a stir for American allies in the Pacific, particularly Australia. AUKUS is the multi-billion-dollar security partnership between Australia, the UK and the US, and includes a deal for the US to build and supply Australia with several nuclear-powered submarines. But building nuclear subs is slow business. Australia won't even receive them until well into the next decade. But recent statements from Donald Trump's nominee for Undersecretary of Defense have raised the possibility that Australia might not ever receive the submarines at all. Elbridge Colby said that it was a good idea on paper for allies like Australia to receive US-built nuclear subs. But the US's building capacity is severely stretched, and handing over yet-to-be-built submarines to Australia instead of keeping them for the US fleet could leave US sailors vulnerable in the event of a Pacific conflict. In February, Australia got a tense show of just what an assertive China might mean. Several Chinese warships sailed south toward Australia. They remained in international waters, but on the morning of February 21, the Chinese flotilla began live fire drills in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. The ships broadcasted their intentions just as the drills started. But it wasn't until a commercial passenger airliner flying between Australia and New Zealand received the broadcast almost half an hour later and radioed it in that Australian authorities found out about the drills. Flights between Australia and New Zealand were rerouted to avoid the area. China, for its part, maintains it has done nothing wrong and has nothing to apologise for.
The Southern Theatre Command of the People's Liberation Army of China organised a fleet of ships to conduct exercises and training in distant seas. The exercises and training activities always maintained safe, standardised and professional operations in accordance with relevant international laws.
Australian leaders have downplayed the incident, agreeing that there was no immediate danger to any ships or aircraft.
We believe it would be appropriate to have been given more warning of this potential event taking place. But I can confirm also that there has been no danger to Australian assets as a result of this action in China.
In the aftermath, though, a war of words has erupted in Australia, particularly as federal elections are not far away. Public opinion on the AUKUS deal is mixed. Australians in favour see it as a vital security boost to Australia's naval capabilities. The US has been Australia's most important security relationship for decades. AUKUS critics view it as hugely expensive for Australia, leaving Australia tied to US Pacific foreign policy. They also worry it could result in Australia being drawn into a future conflict between Taiwan and China. a tense complication given that China is Australia's biggest trading partner. In the past, Trump's spokespeople have repeatedly said the US president will honour AUKUS. But will the transactional president change his mind in the future, leaving Australia high and dry without the submarines it's already begun paying for?
So will AUKUS survive, and to what extent will it protect its member nations as intended? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Canberra, Senior Policy Advisor at the Australian National University's National Security College, David Andrews. From London, Chairperson of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. And from Hong Kong, Independent China Strategist, Andrew Leung. Thanks all so much for being with me. Let me start in Australia, because let's just be clear on where you think Trump stands here. Does not recognizing the acronym of AUKUS when asked, does it indicate at all that he doesn't care? Or was it just a misunderstanding and AUKUS still fits with his America First approach?
Thanks so much for having me. I think the first thing to note is that it's the first comment publicly that Donald Trump's ever made on AUKUS, to the best of my knowledge. So that's something that's debated at length here in Australia is, as you say, does he care? How much is he invested in the relationship? And these are the first words he's actually spoken, rather than that being relayed through others, whether that's through the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defence, or ambassadors or former Australian Prime Ministers. So there is certainly some concern, particularly in light of the recent developments with regards to NATO and other alliances, that this sort of partnership that's been established under the AUKUS banner, whether it will survive and whether it sort of tracks with Donald Trump's sort of outlook on the world. Now, I think people in Australia were heartened by the fact that Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth spoke very positively about AUKUS. We're perhaps a little bit more concerned with some of the comments made by Elbridge Colby in his confirmation hearing as the Undersecretary of Defence for Policy. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty, it's fair to say, in these early stages.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about Mr. Colby's comments in just a second, but it's interesting, David, because your former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, actually said what Trump is doing now is a gift to China. He's surrounded by yes men, and Australia shouldn't believe that they're special when it comes to his decision-making regarding AUKUS in particular. Would you agree with that?
Well, Mr. Turnbull has always been quite forthright in his views ever since working for the Murdoch family. So I think I'll let him sort of speak for himself there. But I think to his substantive point that allies of all sorts, I think, are under pressure at the moment, whether that's the UK, Poland, other partners like Ukraine. Australia has been, its sort of steel and aluminium have been placed under tariff as well. So we're not exempt from those measures at this stage either. So I think it would certainly be prudent from a planning perspective to assume that we won't be given any sort of special dispensation that other allies aren't getting at this stage. So I think in that respect, he's probably making a pretty fair assessment that signs to this stage suggest that all allies are in the same boat. And if you can't prove your value and your worth to the Trump administration and to Mr. Trump personally, then the odds are that support won't be forthcoming in the way that it might have been under previous administration.
Okay, let me ask Greg then, who you think needs this alliance most? And do you think Trump could ask for something in return if he decides that actually the other partners are gaining too much and the Americans are somehow losing out, as he's seen in the case of trade with a number of allies? Will he see this as an opportunity potentially to get leverage and get more out of it?
I don't think so. I think, he views the Pacific as the most important part of our foreign policy and defense and security policy. So I think it's pretty consistent in the administration, the pivot to the Pacific. So that makes AUKUS all the more important. My biggest concern is not what President Trump's attitude is. It's catching up with the commitments that we have. We've committed to, selling 3 or more Virginia-class subs to Australia, and yet, we're way behind in our ability to deliver on that. So, we've had 3% cuts in defense spending in real terms in the last 3 years of the Biden administration. So while the commitment was there, and I think the AUKUS agreement was a great one, we haven't really put our defense spending behind that, and we're way behind in our goals on delivering subs, not only to Australia, but to our own fleet.
Okay, let me ask Andrew then. I mean, if you agree with Greg that Trump views the Pacific as one of the most important areas of foreign policy in the interest of national security, and where does all of this leave China, if that's the case?
There's no doubt that the Trump administration wants to pivot away from Europe and the rest of the world and perhaps concentrate on the Asia Pacific. But on the other hand, there's also no doubt that Trump is belittling allies, not least those in Europe and in other places in the world, including, of course, even Japan and Australia. But I think that there are three main strategic considerations on this issue. The first one is that what is the real security risk underlining Aukus? Of course, it's the freedom of navigation, it's the possibility that China may invade Taiwan. Now, on the first one, freedom of navigation, is that the shipping under any threat? Obviously not, because the Asia Pacific is a main conduit of trade and an economic lifeline for China. Now, as for the possibility of war on Taiwan, Beijing is making very clear that it prefers the top priority as enshrined in 3 white papers issued by Beijing, the last of which coinciding with the Nancy Pelosi's visit, all putting peaceful unification as the top priority. And how peaceful unification going to be achieved is because there is a momentum towards it, partly because of coercion, partly also because of the people-to-people exchanges between the two places, and mainland China and Taiwan. Now, but I think that the second consideration is how reliable is the transatlantic relationship, which is, of course, part of which is the Aukus. But obviously, it's no longer very reliable. You can see that Trump is belittling and also putting sanctions on allies. Now, the final real consideration is that relationship with China. And of course, with what Trump is trying to do with allies, and China market offers a very good lifeline to the economies. That's why a lot of leaders in the West are making a beeline to Beijing.
Okay. I'm wondering, David, what Australia's perspective really is on the threat Australians perceive from China. I mean, the fact that they were doing their naval drills in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand, which they have the right to do, those are international waters. Does it leave a chilling effect on Australians, and then they feel a little more secure because they have the AUKUS alliance, or is this not really factoring in that much?
Well, I think the level of uncertainty in the Australia-China relationship in part goes back to the economic sanctions placed upon Australia by China that occurred during the early years of the pandemic. And since that point, polling has shown that the public perceptions of that relationship and trust in China have sort of dived dramatically. Now, that's not helped by the fact that these sort of activities go on in our near region, or that the Chinese aircraft and ships have harassed Australian vessels and aircraft and used their sonar against Australian divers, again in international waters, but further to the north. Now, this is just the most recent of a series of, as you say, legal maneuvers. So in this circumnavigation of Australia by a Chinese flotilla. Now, I think despite the fact that it's legal, the perception is that it was designed to intimidate or antagonize, or in some way to sort of gain a reaction. And that certainly occurred, that the public reaction has been quite strong in Australia. I think it was very unexpected that this occurred. And despite the fact that Australian and New Zealand naval vessels and aircraft were able to shadow that flotilla, there were still a few key incidents, like the very short notice live fire drills that disrupted aviation traffic going between Australia and New Zealand. So there were certainly elements of it, despite the legality, that I think were very off-putting for a lot of people in Australia.
Okay. David, I'm going to stick with you, actually, because I want to go back to what the new Undersecretary of Defense had said. And as for Australia's submarine purchase, which is a pillar of the Aukus agreement, does Defense Secretary Eldridge Colby have a point in saying that defending Taiwan should be the priority, and if U.S. submarines actually go to Australia, they won't be where they need to be?
Well, I think that that's something that he has articulated previously, and so he's at least being very consistent with his prior beliefs, and so it's not unexpected in that sense. And this is a conversation that's been going on for a little while in Australia, I guess over the last few years since the program was announced. But I guess that the complication is that this path was taken with certain assurances in place that this would, these submarines would be followed through with. And so otherwise there wouldn't have been a desire or a need or a possibility to break away from the existing French deal. And so I guess Australia's submarine plans have been based around this premise. And the concern is maybe not so much about Taiwan and Australia's potential involvement there, but some of the views that Mr. Colby has articulated in the past involve not only ensuring that the European states take a greater role in their self-defense, which I think is not unreasonable, but then also stepping away from the Middle East and saying that Taiwan is not a core issue from US defense and security. So I think the concern is that this is a continuing shrinking of the focus, yes, with a priority on the Indo-Pacific, but there's a level of uncertainty. Does that stop at Taiwan, or does that move further closer home to the United States and leave us out in the cold?
Okay. Let me ask Greg, though, when you heard Eldridge Colby express his skepticism about AUKUS because of the submarine deal and how because they can't be produced quickly enough and at the level that Australia has ordered, they should first go to the U.S. as a priority and be placed off East Asian shores before they're going to Australia. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think that this just, again, shows the importance of my earlier point of ramping up production in the U.S. We should be able to do both. And right now, he's caught in a difficult position because of the lack of production in the U.S. and the real inadequacy of naval ship production, both surface ships as well as submarines. So, this is something that isn't going to be fixed overnight because of the long lead times that are required. I mean, these are good incremental steps. I think, the subs are now stopping more frequently in Australia. You've got a US-UK combined new generation ship that's looking like, late 1930s delivery. But, these things take a long time. So I think, he's just forced to make a choice of keeping those ships in or near Australia, but maybe not, maybe that the whole balance has to be reconsidered. And that's, again, because of the U.S. Navy's inadequacy right now. And that's something that, has happened over the last 5 years, but it's going to take a while to fix.
Okay. And Andrew, let me ask you, because there's a big issue here in competing with China on the technological front about the submarine technology itself. And given how long it takes to finish these submarines, and I'm going to say, Greg, somewhat slim chance that they'll be able to speed up production to the necessary level. Andrew, underwater drones, some are saying, could make all of these submarines even obsolete in the meantime because China's technology development is moving at a pretty quick pace.
For submarines, it's not a be all and end all of everything. But I think the main thing is that the Trump administration wants to pivot away from wars. He doesn't like wars, and he wants to go down in history as a peace president that makes America great again by seizing resources and by bullying perhaps other countries to secure Americans' benefits. But I think as far as the Asia Pacific is concerned, nor does China want a war. But the most important thing is the economic relationship. And of course, Trump wants to get the maximum out of that. And for that matter, as far as Australia is concerned, there's been a thawing of relationship between the two countries. And I mean, there was a lot of Australian businesses investing in China, and China businesses starting investing in Australia. So I think that that's far more important than building submarines. But of course, not that submarines are not important, but it's not the be all and all of the relationship anymore, especially under the Trump 2.0 administration.
Okay. I mean, David, really, how prepared do AUKUS nations need to be for actual conflict if you have a major power, both major powers to be fair, saying they're not interested in war, but at the same time being very aggressive about building their defenses?
Well, there's always a requirement to plan ahead when it comes to defense strategy and policy. I think inevitably, as much as we might want peace, it is the nature of these organizations to prepare for war. And I think when we're talking about a 20 to 30 or even longer lead time for the acquisition of these platforms, is that they can't just go on the basis of present relationships or aspiration, but they have to prepare and provide the best set of opportunities and options to governments of the day. And that, as it stands at the moment, Australia is running down to a very long period of service life for its current submarines, and so it has sought out the best possible opportunity, which is, as far as I'm aware, the best submarines in the world, which is the Virginia class, and then hopefully then the follow-on AUKUS submarines from there. So I think it's not necessarily about focusing on the next 2 to 5 years, because this is, as I say, it's a sort of 40, 50-year relationship and capability development program. So there may, as Greg said, there may have to be some readjustments or some changes to the way things are done in the next little while. But the first of these submarines isn't due to be delivered to Australia for, I believe, another 7 or 8 years. So even if there are some changes in the short term, there's still plenty of room to adjust the scope of that, albeit on a very tight time frame from an Australian perspective. So that's where there might need to be some give and take.
So, Greg, I saw you had a comment earlier on with my first question. I mean, is peace just a pause between conflicts? Do AUKUS nations need to be prepared?
Absolutely, and that was the point I wanted to make, and is it's peace through strength, and that's really what the Trump administration is returning to. You know, everyone on this call is, I think, agreeing that President Trump does not like war. You know, no, I don't think any president likes war, but he is really averse to getting involved in conflicts, and you saw that in his first term, where there were really no major conflicts started during his term. He uses military strength when he needs to. You know, he eliminated ISIS, for example. He took he had General Soleimani terminated in Iran. And, you know, but he doesn't want to get into long boots on the ground. But again, the best way to prepare for war is, the best way to avoid war is prepare for war. So I think you'll see a stepped up commitment to defense and security spending by this administration, contrary to what we saw in the last 4 years. So, you know, again, that's the peace through strength is coming back to Washington.
Okay, but Andrew, final thoughts. I mean, can both sides be working on peace through strength and peace through building their defenses and armory? Because honestly, what does it lead to if not ultimately some kind of conflict?
Of course, one has got to prepare for war, and of course, with technologies and submarines, nuclear power submarines are important. But I think that the AUKUS is very far from the top of the list in the minds of the leaders concerned. In the UK, in Australia, in the White House, and also in Beijing. The most important, of course, is the war in Ukraine, the Middle East, and then, of course, establishing some kind of stabilizing the world economy. And then both the UK and Australia are recalibrating the relationship with China. So I think there are far more important issues on the minds of the leaders. But of course, this is not to belittle the preparations for 21st century technologies that would never stop. But it's a question of priorities in this game.
Okay, David, I can give you a final minute for your thoughts there.
Well, I'd say one thing that we haven't addressed from an Australian perspective is that this is actually just a facet, a single part of the wider Australia-US alliance. So I think from the Australian perspective, the ANZUS alliance is the most fundamental thing, with AUKUS a subsidiary element of that rather than it forwarding the conversation. So there's a broader suite of force posture initiatives between Australia and the US that are being modified as well. It's not just the submarines. So this is an important part, a very key part, but it's not all that there is in that relationship.
And meanwhile, how much is Australia really willing to risk, given China is its biggest trading partner?
Well, I mean, I think that's really the fundamental question. And I think when it comes to most of these conflicts, and as we've all been saying, nobody wants conflict to be the outcome. So it's doing everything that is possible short of that to deter conflict, and doing that through military means as well as through economic and diplomatic means. So I think it's the million-dollar question, but hopefully we never have to actually answer that question.
Okay, David, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.